Hi there, my name's Richard Watts from People Make It Work. We're supporting Jerwood Arts with the Western Jerwood Creative Bursary Programme and have a responsibility for shaping and delivering the organisation development element of that, as well as co-creating the leadership development programme for fellows that will be starting a bit later in 2021. Today, I'm thinking a bit in advance of our first workshop of 21 about inclusive culture. If you're interested in understanding what our organisational culture is and how we might change it, then I really recommend that you watch a video and look at some slides that I prepared in the autumn of 2020 around what is our culture and how do we change it. Today, I'm thinking particularly about inclusive culture and trying to think together about what an inclusive culture is, how it operates, what kinds of norms it might adopt. And during this programme of work over the next 8 weeks, we'll be thinking some more about how we can evolve and refine our culture in order to support everybody who's part of our organisation. So what do we mean by inclusive culture? Well, I'm going to suggest in this presentation and short video that we might be thinking about 5 characteristics within our organisational culture that enable for it to feel inclusive. And that is curiosity, adaptiveness, enabling, learning, and a sense of being live. And we'll turn to some of these questions about how we bring that about at the end of this programme. But right now, I thought I would talk a little bit more about each of those 5 elements. So I'm thinking, first of all, about being curious and that sense that one of the ways in which our organisational cultures operate is by really seeking to first understand and then be understood. So within our culture, we're recognising that there might be learning to be had, there might be fruitful new ways of being. And so curiosity within our culture feels like a really core characteristic. So I'm seeing culture as mutable, as something that changes, that constantly shifts, and that is affected by those that are within the culture. So an inclusive culture is likely to be curious about the people within the organisation, about those it's seeking to affect, and recognises that actually our job as leaders isn't about kind of maintaining these norms and saying, this is how we do things around here. So, you know, buck up and join up and get with the programme. More, it's about recognising that leadership's about maintaining values. And what are the values at the heart of our organisation? And how do we maintain those as we're changing, as we're affected, as we're more and more inclusive in our practice? So we're thinking about, in this case, we're thinking about curiosity as a key function of an inclusive culture, seeking to understand and then be understood, seeing culture as mutable, affected and changing over time, and recognizing that leadership's about maintaining our values, not about maintaining our norms. So a second perspective that I thought we could talk a bit about is being adaptive, which relates to that immutable element that I've just been talking about. So we see that culture in an organisation is constantly refining. It constantly refines as the world refines. We're operating within a dynamic social context, and that dynamic affects our society and the world at large. It also affects the organizational culture that we're living within. Some cultures are more insular and some more extrovert within organizations. And so the pace of change and what's like the driver will be different from organization to organization. But inclusive cultures will be orientated towards that sense of constantly refining. Now, what does the world need us to be? Now, what does the world need us to be? Now, what does the world need us to be? That kind of adaptive rhythm. I think we can also expect that an inclusive culture will be amended and affected by its participants. So when people join an organizational culture, inevitably there's some practice of kind of coming acclimatization, seeking to understand the culture as it exists and seeking to kind of conform and feel shaped by that culture. And as long as the culture's enabling and positive and supportive, then some acclimatization is inevitable, isn't it? But what we should also see in an inclusive culture is that we don't require that adaptation to only happen on the side of the new participant, but that through that curiosity that I talked about before, we're shaped by those who are within our culture, and that includes new participants. I think it also includes long-serving staff, and it also includes like emerging ideas amongst current staff. So that sense that we're adaptive, that we're responding, that our culture is shaped by the circumstances around us. And I think we see adaptive cultures, inclusive cultures, as also seeking innovations to accommodate and enable. So recognizing that it's likely that in our culture as it currently stands, we will have barriers that frustrate others from contributing their full value to the organization. So thinking about how do we accommodate and enable, what changes do we need to make in order to create a space that's equitable and that doesn't only have a range of people in it, but has a range of people in it who feel equally safe, have equal agency, are listened to in equality, and can affect the organization, have that sense of agency that's so important. So I think we've been talking a bit about these ideas flow through, don't they, from curiosity to this sense of being adaptive, to this sense of being enabling, looking for interventions that empower, that make safe, that enable others, and recognizing that our cultural organization, our culture within our organization, is a system of habits and practices, a software of thinking that is our culture. And an inclusive culture will be a system that preferences enabling difference over creating consistency. So seeking to enable and support change from others rather than to cause others to conform to the way that we're currently working. So I think all of this says, in many ways, that we're thinking about being a learning organisation and recognising that as we work together, we're not fixed, and we see that our future culture, our future effectiveness is only possible if we're constantly refining and developing ourselves. So an inclusive culture is future orientated, perhaps rather than holding on to legacy, it's looking at what we need to be, what's needed now of our culture in order that it enables everyone to be contributing, to be affecting the organisation. So typically a learning organisation in this sense is going to be valuing insight and divergent perspectives. So within the culture, that curiosity, that sense of enabling and learning means that we'll be valuing insight more than perspectives. And divergent perspectives. And I think that also means, from a cultural perspective, that we're creating value for the organisation through enabling those new perspectives, so that we see that we're learning across the ways that we work, across the ways that we behave, across the ways that we connect, across the ways that we speak about ourselves. You know, our culture affects all of those things, doesn't it? So not only are we valuing insight and divergent perspectives, but we're creating value through enabling those new perspectives. We're better for it. We're more connected and relevant for, you know, as a result of those divergent perspectives. So finally, I was thinking about this idea of being live and recognizing that our culture is how we do things around here. And that means it's a living thing that we affect and is affected by us, rather than a fixed thing that we live under. It's a thing that we're part of. It's organic, it's holistic, it's part of a system. So leaders' live behaviour has a functional and symbolic effect on the culture. There isn't a culture that exists beyond my leadership. There's a culture that's affected by my leadership. And living our inclusive culture isn't the same as describing it. Sometimes that can shape the culture, but the most fundamental way of generating our culture, an inclusive culture, is by living it in our actions, through the ways that we work. So coming back to these kind of unpacking ideas under these headings of curious, adaptive, enabling, learning, and live. Curious, we might want to ask the questions: how do we learn that we need to change within our culture? Adaptive, how are we changing in response to new insights within our culture? Enabling, how do we create safety and equity for everyone? Learning, what are we coming to see about the way that we're working in this dynamic space? And live, what's changing now? And what needs to be embedded, moved from me doing something differently to embedding that in the culture, so that it becomes our collective automatic response. So at this stage, it might be that we want to have some conversations within our organisations to unpack some of those ideas about inclusive practice and what we mean by an inclusive culture in our organisation. What's our version of those characteristics? And maybe it's about a sort of anthropological review of our organisation as it stands. In which ways are we inclusive at the moment? In which and for whom? And if we congratulate ourselves on our inclusiveness, for whom might we appear less inclusive? And how might we direct some curiosity in that direction? How are we listening, and how are we making it evident that it's possible to share views and be effective, affect the culture of the organisation that we're in? Where are the bad habits that have outlasted their value? And later on in this programme, we'll be thinking some more about what's the role of governance in making change, and how do we change culture? How do we shift it beyond the conversations that we're having so far? So looking forward to seeing you in your workshop. And in that session, we'll be unpacking some of these ideas, encouraging you to have some discussion in breakout sessions too about the ways in which your organisation exemplifies an inclusive culture and what you might need to work on and develop in order to dial up that inclusive nature. For now, thanks very much for spending time with us, and see you in the workshop. Thank you.